So in this first mock case of the online newspaper advertising case, this particular candidate is a first-year master's student in a dual business/engineering type of major. Before doing this particular case, this candidate simply read some books on how to do case interviews and have done between 5 to 10 live cases. So she is still relatively new in the area of consulting case interviews. Considering the overall performance of this candidate, I would give the candidate a B-, which means that the candidate most likely will not pass the first round. And I gave that grade based on several points that I will elaborate further in the case itself. Overall, when you listen to and watch the performance of this particular candidate, notice that the candidate often lacked a hypothesis to drive the case. In addition, oftentimes the candidate lacked an explanation to what she is doing and failed to explain exactly why she is doing a particular analysis and a particular calculation. To add insult to injury, the lack of accuracy and the lack of speed with her mental math and with her calculations didn't help her either. So look out for these points as we delve into the case itself.
So your client is the online division of a major newspaper publisher in the US. You can think of your client as the online division of an equivalent of a New York Times or a Wall Street Journal. Recently, the client has seen a revenue decline. So the director of this online division has come to you to ask for help.
So to understand the problem, our client is an online newspaper publisher, and recently the revenue is down, and our client is trying to identify the reason for this decrease in revenue. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, so our objective today is to figure out why we have experienced a revenue decline and pinpoint the reason for it.
That is correct.
Okay.
And hopefully grow the revenue after we know the problem, right?
Okay, so turn things around. So does that entail that we want to bring our profits up, or is it just revenue?
Just revenue.
Okay, so here is 3 areas that I want to explore in order to see how we can identify the problem of revenue decrease and hopefully turn things around. So first thing, I want to know the little bit more information about our client. What are their revenue stream? What is their market position? And how have they been performing so far in the recent years and in the online publishing market?
Okay.
And secondly, I'll go into a little bit more detail about who are the readers, who reads our content, and if we can identify different segments of who the readers are, we might be able to identify the reason. Is there a misalignment between the content that we create versus the type of readers that we have?
Okay.
And lastly, I want to explore if we have any competition in the market of online publishing, and how have they been doing, and what have their market share been, and so potentially identify the problem. So I would like to start with knowing a little bit more about our clients. What are their revenue streams?
Okay.
And how has that changed over time?
Let's pause here for a little bit and have an initial assessment of the candidate's performance. As you can see, the candidate did a couple of things at the beginning. She reiterated the initial problem, verified if the key objective was to increase profit or to increase revenue, and then went about using 3 dimensions to analyze the problem, namely the publisher, the reader, and the competition. These are good practices. However, what the candidate lacked was her own hypothesis on the specific reasons within each dimension that might be causing the revenue decline. More specifically, When going into the competition side of the analysis, the candidate simply said, I want to know more about our competition, what their behaviors are, and what their market shares are. Whereas a better response could be, I want to know more about our competition, their market share, and my hypothesis here is that perhaps because of a rapid rise of a new competitor in the market, it has taken away revenue shares from our client and has caused this revenue decline. Adding your own hypothesis into your initial structure gives you a much stronger response to the case. Another thing to note here is that when digging deeper into the revenue side, the candidate asked about how revenues have changed over the past several years. This is a very good habit to have. However, an even better habit should be to go into the specific price and the volume associated with the revenue, and to ask specifically how has the price and volume respectively changed within the past several years. That is a much stronger response than looking just at the overall revenue. Having price and volume detailed out in the initial structure will also remind you and guide you in later parts of the case as well.
No problem. So just, from your sense of perspective, for an online publisher, what do you think their revenue streams are?
So the first few things I can think of is the content that they create online. So news, so there would be space for advertisement. So that's the first thing that came to my mind for revenue. And also subscription that I have. So for instance, I subscribe to New York Times, I pay a monthly fee. So those recurring payments could be another revenue stream. And also there could be some, so without knowing the publisher in a little bit more detail, this is just my guess for now. Maybe for instance, like New York Times, they also have physical papers that print out and sells. And so that could be another potential revenue stream.
No problem. So the physical paper, you can lump it into subscription as well.
Okay.
But for our case, our client is the online division of the publisher.
Okay.
So we don't care about their offline part. So yeah, you're correct. Advertisement and subscription are the two major areas.
So these are the two main revenue stream for our customer.
Exactly.
For our client.
And then just to help you, it turns out that over 90% of our revenue comes from advertisement, and only around 10% comes from subscription.
Okay.
Okay.
Interesting. So since the advertisement portion is this very large, I will tackle that area first.
Okay.
So do we know if our revenue from the advertisement has changed in the recent year, and how has that changed?
Let's pause here again for a little bit. Notice that I simply fed the candidate that the revenue streams coming from advertisement and from subscription are 90% and 10% respectively. This is something very important when you're in a profitability or revenue type of case, where whenever you have multiple product lines or multiple revenue streams, a very first thing you should be asking is the percentage of revenue we are deriving from each of these revenue streams, and if each stream is growing or declining. Much insight can be derived by segmenting the overall revenue into more detailed revenues.
No problem. So it seems like that our revenue from the advertisement has been decreasing, and then it is down by 10% this year compared to previous years.
Okay, down 10% this year. And do we know if so how do we gain revenue from advertisement? Is that by, for instance, number of ads that we put out, or is that a lump into a package that we sell to our customer?
Okay, so here again, I want to ask you, what do you think usually these contracts are held? How do you think we make money from advertisement?
Um, my guess here would be that we sell the number of advertisement space to our client for a certain price, and we also advertise for the same ads a certain number of times. So, for instance, we will sell 100 ads for this certain customer. For instance, this new restaurant in town will publish the ads for it for 100 times for a certain price. Is that a correct assumption?
Okay, so just to give you more clarifying information, how it happened before with offline newspapers is that we would partner directly with a major advertiser, say Macy's, or a certain company that wants to do advertising, and we have a contract with them for a specific amount of money for our offline actual physical newspapers. However, with the online model, because there are millions and millions of advertisers, we have to partner with a third party, usually with Google, with Facebook, and then they connect. For example, if we are New York Times, they connect us with the advertisers, the millions of advertisers. That is the information.
Okay, so interesting. So now we need to work with a third party for publishing our ads. So does the third party charge a certain amount of money in order to publish the ads?
Yeah. So how that happens is, the advertisement model is what's called an impression-based advertisement, where you can think about it. If the advertisement shows up on a particular page on a New York Times article, as long as it shows up, and even when the customer or the viewer doesn't even necessarily have to click into the advertisement, as long as it shows up, we can charge for it as a publisher. So we can charge Google, who in turn charges the advertiser.
Okay, so if that means if more viewers comes to our online platform, we will be able to have the ads viewed by more people, and then therefore we can charge more. Is that?
That is the gist of it. That is a good understanding.
Okay, so that means traffic to our ads, to our website or the platform is essential for bringing in revenue. Is that assumption correct?
That makes sense.
Okay. So do we know anything about the pattern or the trend of how much traffic that we attract online?
Again, notice here that the candidate identified that the number of viewers or the website traffic is a big factor to our advertisement revenue. A logical question, and one that the candidate asked, was, do we know the trend or the pattern of the number of viewers that we attract to our online website? Although this is a logical question, it still lacks the hypothesis and your own creative thinking on why revenue is declining overall. A better question to ask in this particular juncture is to say, noticing that the traffic is a determinant factor on the total advertising revenue that we drive, my hypothesis is that the amount of traffic and the amount of readers that we attract to our website has decreased by around 10%, matching the revenue decrease as well.
Yes, we actually have that. So good question. Take a look at this exhibit and let me know what you think.
Sure. Let's see. So we are looking at the number of unique site visitors by desktop in millions, and it looks like that it's been steadily growing since 2009. Let's see. So looks like that if we are gaining more traffic to the web to our platform, it's kind of interesting that we are not we're still losing revenue. So I would look a little, maybe go back to the pricing and see if is there any reason or has any change happened in our pricing model that affects our revenue despite this growing trend of number visitor to our platform.
Yes, can you elaborate a little bit more? I'm hearing, I'm trying to hear a hypothesis here. I'm trying to hear why do you think one particular reason could be affecting our revenue. So can you elaborate more your thoughts?
So right now, given the data I'm seeing here, my hypothesis is that the revenue is not growing because the pricing that we are the pricing model that we are using right now is perhaps we are decreasing price more than we can, so that since revenue equals price times volume, and we are gaining volume in terms of visitor, but we are losing revenue in this case. So I'm suspecting that pricing is the cause for the decreasing revenue.
Absolutely, that is a valid hypothesis. And let me tell you, the price that we've been charging through Google and through Facebook, and then has been the same model. The pricing hasn't really changed. But then just to help you out here, the number of site visitors doesn't necessarily correspond to the volume, because the advertisement is charged per impression based. So it's per number of pages viewed instead of just the number of unique visitors. Does that make sense?
Oh, interesting. Oh, yeah, definitely. So we have a large amount of visitor, but maybe they are. So my hypothesis now is that they are not staying on our website for long enough to view enough page. So the impression that we are giving is not growing.
That is possible. That is possible. So let me take now that you've mentioned that part, let me show you another chart and let me know what you think, okay?
Sure. So it looks like just looking at comparing these two charts here, it looks like the number of pages viewed has also been growing for desktop only visitors. So I'm wondering, and also then, does our traffic also come from other sources? For instance, customer readers that using other ways to access our platform, for instance, tablets, mobile phones.
Okay, and that is because this particular chart is for desktop only, is that correct?
Right.
So desktop only, you're right, it means that it's the viewership on the desktop access of a New York Times. And let's just assume that is really the dominant way of people viewing online newspaper these days. So you can ignore the other parts. This would be the main revenue stream for us.
Okay. So let's see. So the revenue has been declining, and do we know for how long has the revenue been declining?
Yes, so basically compared to 2006 values, now we're in 2016,
Right.
Our revenue has decreased by 10% compared to 10 years ago.
Okay, compared to 10 years ago. So we have increased our traffic by about 10%. And the number of visitors we have has increased by about so in 2016 the number of visitors we have is 26.3 million versus in 2006 we have 20.2, and that is about a 30% increase in terms of the number of visitors. And in terms of the number of page view, in 2016 we have 330 million versus in 2006 we have 300, and that is 330 minus 300, we can roughly estimate it as to be 30. Okay, so now given we have done the calculation based on the number of visitor increase versus of the number of page increase, it looks like that the number of page view increase is not growing as fast as our visitor.
Okay.
So now my hypothesis is suggesting the hypothesis right now is that the number of page view is not per customer is not growing as fast to keep up with our growing number of visitors.
Here, the candidate did something critically wrong and probably would have cost her the case. Having trouble finding out the exact reason for the 10% decrease in revenue, the candidate simply did a bunch of calculation with the charts given to her without explaining why those calculations would solve her problem. After about 2 minutes of calculation on her own, she came out with a hypothesis saying that the number of pages is not growing as fast as the number of unique visitors. This is a correct observation. But notice that it has nothing to do with our business problem and the fact that our revenues have been declining. While she failed to explain why she thinks this particular calculation of hers will help solve our business problem. If the candidate wanted to proceed with this calculation, a way to justify it would be to say, for example, my hypothesis is that the ratio of the number of pages per unique visitor correlates with our revenue. And the fact that the pages per unique visitor decreased explained the revenue decrease. Even though this is actually a very wrong hypothesis, it at least explains why you're doing this calculation. And her critical mistake, and the one that probably caused her the case, was not explaining why she is doing this calculation at all.
Well, the overall revenue has declined 10% for the past 10 years, and that's all we know. So it doesn't, I don't understand what you mentioned, how that can affect the revenue decline, right? So regardless of the number of unique visitors or the number of pages viewed, our overall revenue generated has declined by 10% in that 10-year span. So let me just give you some, a little bit more background. So in this case, usually how it happens is in a particular page, there are certain advertisement blocks, right? You would imagine yourself reading an article from the New York Times. During a certain page, it would be perhaps 4 blocks within that page that has opportunities for advertisement through Google or through Facebook, right? So, and then, throughout, on average, there has been basically around 4 advertisement posts for each page. Yeah, and then interestingly enough, that number has been the same So, given all this information and using your imagination and your creativity, why do you think our revenue still declined by 10% over the 10-year span?
Okay, so that's some new information I'm hearing there. So every page, the number of advertisement posts per page has been the same. Is that what I'm hearing?
That is correct.
That's correct.
That is
Okay,
correct.
Is that correct? Okay. So number of posts per page has not changed, and the number. So our revenue then would be number of posts per page times the page that visitors view, and times the number of visitors. Number of page per visitor.
And just, the revenue is supposed to be in a dollar amount. So is there something else that's missing?
And then the price that we charge for each post.
That sounds correct.
You hear the candidate do something here that would probably boost her score up, in the sense that she wrote out a formula trying to figure out the exact components of the total revenue and tried to break the bigger problem, that is the overall revenue, down into smaller problems. The pages, the post per page, etc. This is a very smart thing to do in case interviews. Whenever there is a revenue problem, oftentimes you can write some formula of this kind where you can segment the overall revenue into more specific variables. By doing this, you can get to the answer faster, and you will be able to pinpoint the exact reason within the overall revenue that is causing the decline. Another thing you will notice is that the candidate forgot to put price per post in her formula until I reminded her. During a case interview, be aware that a revenue, a market size, or other types of numbers are often in dollar amounts. For example, if you're asked in an interview, what is the market size of bicycles in the United States? Instead of giving the interviewer the total number of bicycles that exist in the United States, what the interviewer is asking for is likely the total dollar value associated with the total number of bicycles. So it is always good to clarify with the interviewer whether she is asking for a dollar value or not.
So tell me what are the trends for these three components you've identified? Number of posts per page, number of pages, and then the price for the post.
So it looks like the number of posts per page has so you've said that's constant. No change there, and then the pricing model we have no change as well. So it's the number of pages that we have.
So what about the trends for the number of pages viewed?
So the number of pages viewed has grown by 10%. But our revenue is down 10%.
Yes. So what do you think might be the reason here?
Interesting thing to note here is that the candidate got a little bit stuck. She couldn't find the exact reason why the revenue is decreasing, and she went silent for 30 seconds to a minute trying to figure it out. In this situation, instead of being completely stuck, it is always good to know that the case interview is a conversational experience, whereas the interviewer is incentivized to help you. The interviewer wants to see you succeed. So never think you are in this battlefield where you are the only one fighting against this dragon or this monster. Think about the interviewer as your sword, and you should use the sword strategically sometimes to help solve the problem. In this scenario, when you've exhausted all your ideas, this is a time when you ask for some type of hint from the interviewer. But be aware to ask him in a very subtle way, whereas I would actually caution the use of the word hint or help at all, because the interviewer might be thinking that you want him to solve the problem for you. What I would say instead in this particular situation would be, for example, so I've looked at these number of variables, the post, the pages, the price, and they don't really explain why the revenue is decreasing. So I'm a little bit confused here. Is there a particular direction that you want me to go to? Or is there something very subtle that I'm missing in my approach? This is the way I phrased it, of asking the interviewer for help without blatantly mentioning the word hint or blatantly crying for help. Oftentimes, whenever you ask it this way, the interviewer sympathizes with you and will give you some sort of help in this case. So always be aware, always, that your interviewer is a sword helping you, not a sword against you.
So that means our visitors are visiting the page, but can we make that assumption that once they get to the page, they will be able to see the post?
Absolutely. That is, you just hit it. That's a very correct. So very, very nice insight. So what actually happens is that not all the posts show up for the pages shown. And that is because of the emergence of ad blocking recently through Google Chrome, through all the web browsers. They offer these ad blocking capabilities. And because of that, whenever a user uses that capability, the ads don't show up. And if it doesn't show up, we can't charge Google, who can't charge the advertisers. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So do we know any information, any data that tells us how frequent ad blocking is used for our visitors then?
That is very good question. So based on the information I've already given you, can you actually calculate that yourself? So I would like to know, what is the percentage of pages views that uses ad blocking?
We still have 270 million viewers of our page that can get to the advertisement out of the 330 million people. So divide by 3. So that's about 85% of the viewer that is still looking at the ads that we put onto our page right now.
Okay, so my question was, what is the percentage of pages that are being ad blocked?
Ad block, so that would be just 1 minus the 85% that are still viewing our page. So we have about 15% ad block.
So here the candidate went through the calculation to find the percentage of pages that are being ad blocked. When answering these calculation type of questions, a very good thing to note is that always remember what the interviewer is asking for. For example, I asked specifically, what is the percentage of pages that are being ad blocked, where the candidate answered 85%, which is the percentage of pages that are not being ad blocked. So that is a big minus. Also, the candidate didn't know exactly how to calculate 270 divided by 330, which actually is around 82%, and simply said it's 85%. So there are two things to remember here. One is that whenever you're rounding numbers, make sure that you ask the interviewer if it is okay to do so. Second, when doing divisions between complicated numbers, the easiest way to do it is to find the common denominator. Between 270 and 330, for example, when I do this type of mental math, I find that 30 is a good common denominator, where if you divide both numbers by 30, 270 divided by 30 is 9, and 330 divided by 30 is 11, while 9 over 11 is about 82%. So these are just some of the good habits that you should have during a consulting case interview.
Play pages.
Okay, so that sounds very reasonable, but just to correct your numbers, 270 million divided by 330 million is actually around 82%.
82%.
And then, so the number of pages that are being ad blocked are around 18%.
18%.
But then your overall idea is correct. So given all that information, this director of the online division of this major U.S. newspaper publisher came to you and then asked for what the problem is and what your advice is. So please tell him what to do.
So can I take a minute? So I'm ready.
Okay.
So our client has been experiencing a 10% decline in revenue, and given the analysis we have done, we found out that the number of visitors who has been using ad blocking is the main cause of this decrease in revenue, despite the increased number of visitors coming to our site and the number of page viewed. So going forward, in order to attack this decrease in revenue, hopefully we can implement some other techniques for reducing the number of ad blocking visitors, as well as maybe, since we have not changed pricing in the past 10 years, and also the post pages per page hasn't changed as well. So we might explore some adjustment in those areas to increase the number of posts per page, and then explore some pricing options in order to increase the revenue and turn things around.
In this final recommendation part of the case, the candidate can improve in the following ways. Number one, whenever you begin the recommendation, it is always a good habit to have to reiterate the initial question that the interviewer asked in the beginning of the case. For example, in this case, how I would phrase the recommendation would be, so as the director of this online newspaper agency, you came in and asked me two questions. One, why is our revenue declining? And two, how should we turn it around? To answer the first question, we found that the reason is this and that. Now, catering to that particular reason of the revenue decline, how we would turn it around would be to do this and that. See that by reiterating the initial question, it allows you to think back on the main objective of the case from the very beginning and will guide you towards a more effective answer. A second thing to note here is that during the final recommendation, it is wise to give more detailed action items for the client to do. Instead of just saying that the client can increase revenue by reducing the rate of ad blocking, a better candidate would say, the online publisher can reduce ad blocking by incentivizing viewers to take off ad blocking or prohibiting viewers to read their articles if they use ad blocking, and things of that nature. The more granular the recommendation you have, and especially when you have a very innovative idea during the recommendation, the interviewer tends to add points to those answers. And to wrap up, this is the end to this case.